welcome to Crime Clueless. I'm your host, Jenna.
I'm Laura.
I'm Krista.
And I'm Kayla.
We have another great case for you today. And guess what, Kayla? It's not a cold case.
Hey, thank you.
Oh,
Yes.
Need that closure.
This case is so interesting. Let's dive right in.
wait.
Christine Franke was a bright, ambitious 25-year-old with her whole life ahead of her. As a University of Central Florida student and beloved friend, Christine balanced her days between academics, work, and dreaming of her future. But on October 21st, 2001, her life came to a sudden and tragic end when she was found murdered in her Orlando apartment, a senseless crime that would haunt her family and friends for years to come. In this episode, we'll delve into the details of Christine's life, the chilling events of that fateful night, and the dogged determination of investigators who refused to give up on solving her case, even as the trail grew older. What happened to Christine Franke, and how did DNA technology finally crack a case that seemed destined to remain a mystery? Let's dive in. Christine was born on August 13th, 1975, in Islip, New York. Her mom was Christina, aka Tina, and her dad was John. Christine was born into a big Italian family, joining 3 other siblings, Maria, Barbara, and John. When Christine was 8 or 9, in 1985, her family moved to Vero Beach, which is about 100 miles southeast of Orlando. Christine went on to graduate from Vero Beach High School in 1994. In 1999, Christine and her boyfriend ended their relationship, and Christine started dating a woman named Jennifer H. We will call her Jen through this episode, as a lot of the sources that I used while writing it called her that. Christine had originally met Jen in high school. She was a couple years younger than Christine. Jen was friends with Christine's younger sister, and their families were friends. For a while, Jen and Christine lived in Christine's sister's house in Vero Beach. Christine was a student at the University of Central Florida, UCF, and desperately wanted to live closer to school. Jen wasn't so desperate to move to Orlando because she was managing her family's furniture business in Vero Beach. Eventually, they made the decision to move to Orlando. This was in part because their good friends were going to move to Orlando as well. These two, Clint and his girlfriend Kelly, were actually closer friends with Jen rather than Christine, helping her decide to move. Clint and Jen had been besties since about halfway through high school. Kelly was 5 years younger than Clint and met them when she was 18. Christine was introduced to the pair when she and Jen began dating in 1999. They all became really close friends, hanging out all the time and even traveling to Ireland and New York City for a convention, plus Long Island to visit family together. Christine and Clint really clicked, and the decision to move to Orlando all together began to take shape. In 2001, they went house hunting, looking to all share one, but they realized 2 apartments were cheaper, so they ended up settling on the Plaza Terrace Drive complex, where they managed to snag adjacent apartments. They loved this because it meant that they could hang out with each other all the time, share meals, they would even have water gun fights. Jen and Clint loved playing video games together. Kelly said that Christine would help her study and even helped her write some of her first papers for college. Christine was the oldest of the 4 of them, and the others kind of regarded her as the role model. She was the most responsible, and since finding her calling in early elementary education for children with developmental disabilities, she was laser focused on finishing her degree. Christine's mother said Christine didn't always know what she wanted to do with her life, but once she found the degree she was working towards, she was really driven and super motivated. Christine was actually paying for her degree by working full-time as a bartender and waitress at Cigars, which is spelled with a Z on the end, which was located at Universal City Walk. Trying to juggle school and work and a job, had her working night shifts, which often went really late into the night. Christine loved playing softball and had a great sense of adventure. She was always trying new things, like riding a motorcycle or dyeing her hair green or orange. Christine, yes. Christine also collected funky picture frames from all over and was known to have a huge shoe collection that was described as eclectic. She took pride in having her own place with Jen, and the 2 worked together to make it homey. Both were so busy with work and school. Jen was going to school for real estate with Clint. and it was also pretty messy too. Jen and Christine shared a dog, an Arctic wolf-shaped German mix who they adored. Christine was such a caring person and completely involved with the school she was interning at. She was planning to dress up as the Giving Tree for Halloween in 2001.
Love that.
Isn't that a great costume? By Saturday, October 20th, 2001, Jen had been in Vero Beach since Tuesday. The drive between Vero Beach and Orlando is a little under 2 hours, so when Jen worked at her parents' furniture company, she usually stayed for 3 or so days rather than doing that drive back and forth. She liked the schedule because she was able to be back in Orlando for long weekends with Christine. Jen took their dog when she went to Vero Beach, who was able to stay at her parents' house while she worked during the day. During this particular week, Christine had headed down to Vero Beach on Wednesday to see Jen and their dog, then headed back to Orlando for classes and work.
When did she head back, Jenna? She was there on Wednesday.
Jen went down to Vero Beach on Tuesday. Christine went down on Wednesday just for the day, and then went back up to Orlando for classes, her internship, and work.
So she was back that.
Yes. Jen was planning to head back to Orlando on Saturday that week. It was a little longer trip than usual because her mom had been on a furniture buying trip in North Carolina for their furniture business. On Saturday, October 20th, Christine worked a double shift. Between shifts, Jen called Christine to let her know she had to stay the night in Vero Beach because her mom's dishwasher basically exploded.
Oof. Rough.
It actually flooded the whole kitchen and the living room. And with her mom still gone, she knew she needed to stay and clean up and take care of water damage and making sure it didn't get any worse. Their call on that Saturday afternoon was short and sweet, with Christine in a good mood. She loved Halloween and had gone all out on decor for their apartment. Plus, she had been able to snag tickets to Universal's Halloween Horror for the 4 of them, plus some of her other friends. She was super excited to go to this event. I remember when we were there a couple years ago during this time, it looked so cool. All the setup, all the decorations.
Yeah, all the videos I always see of Universal, they go all out. It looks really cool.
They do Halloween right.
Halloween is my favorite too. I definitely need to go there one year.
Yeah, we should definitely plan that. They didn't have a lot of time to talk between the dishwasher and Christine at work. Saying goodbye, Jen had no way of knowing he would never get to talk to Christine again. Since Jen was staying in Vero Beach and it was Saturday, her and her brother threw a pool party at her mom's house. Jen got thrown in the pool, and if you remember, early phones were in 2001, and honestly, not even that long ago. If your phone goes in the pool, it is done for. Jen didn't know if Christine had tried to call her when she went to bed, and knowing Christine would be tired after her double shift, she decided to call later in the day on Sunday when she woke up. Christine, meanwhile, as I mentioned, worked a double shift at Cigars on Saturday. Because she worked so much Saturday, she had gone to dinner with Clint and Kelly on Friday night. They went to a place called Tijuana Flats. On Saturday, before work, she bought 6 tickets to Universal's Halloween of Horror for $126 total.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
That's like how much one ticket is now.
Exactly.
Go back to that pricing.
Exactly. During Christine's break between shifts, she stopped at a place called Dappy's Novelties, which was next to her work. She bought some Halloween lanterns to add to their decor, which was already above and beyond. This receipt was timestamped at 5:23 p.m. Work was busy that night and the time flew by. Cigars stopped serving alcohol at 2 a.m. Then everyone working stayed to clean up the bar. Whether it was because they had a lot to clean, or they were extra thorough because it had been a long week, or maybe they just enjoyed chatting while cleaning up after such a busy night, they didn't leave for a while. Christine reportedly had about $500 in cash with her from her share of the tip pool that evening. Christine walked to her car in the employee garage with coworkers Todd, Jason, and Danny. Surveillance footage showed them walking to the escalator at 3:51 a.m. Surveillance also showed Christine driving out of the garage alone. Christine lived 13 miles from Cigars, and with no traffic in the middle of the night, it would generally take her about 20 minutes to get home. Unfortunately, at this time, Christine's apartment complex did not have surveillance, so we don't have any way of knowing if Christine came straight home or if she was alone. The apartment that Christine and Jen lived in, Plaza Terrace, was a 2-story garden-style apartment complex with 200 units. It's the type where the door to each apartment opens up to a covered area that's in the outside, and those hallways all connect.
Wait, so sorry, is it kind of like a motel type setup? So all the doors are like outside, or like more like a hotel where it's inside and like you walk down the hall?
No, the first one that you said, where it's like a motel where they all open to the outside.
Okay, so you can like see every single door. There's no like internal hallway.
Exactly.
Okay.
These particular hallways and stairs to the apartments were accessible by really anyone. Kelly and Jen described these hallways as dark and creepy, particularly because the hallway had no light fixtures, making them super dark, especially at night.
Wait, so sorry. Hallway's dark and creepy. How are they all outside?
It's more so not like an open face, but you know how a lot of the apartments here in Arizona, you go up the stairs and then there's 4 doors, outside hallway, kind of.
Yes, a covered outside hallway.
Covered outside hallway.
Like my apartment complex?
But more open than yours.
Okay.
Like yours has much longer halls than this one did.
Okay.
Probably like my first apartment here.
Yes, exactly.
Any like doors? Was it?
Just trying to picture it. Or all together, hallway, or
I think there are 6 because I know that Christine's apartment looked out. You could see it from the parking lot. Jen and Clint were right next to Christine, and then there was someone else on the other side.
like a 3 and 3.
I think so. That's what it looks like from pictures that are in the case note.
It's not like you wouldn't go up the stairs and open a door to go into the.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no doors. Like you would walk straight from the parking lot to her apartment door without going through any doors, security, gate.
Like if we can, we need to post a picture of this on our website.
Yes, let's do
People
that.
are as confused as I am.
We'll find it.
Yes, I will find it and we will post it on our blog. The hallways and the stairways were concrete and metal, and it was super quiet. You could jog up the stairs and through the hallway and not make a sound. It absorbed any of the sound that was made. Sunday morning, Jen woke up and tried to call Christine from her mom's landline. No answer. Assuming Christine was sleeping in after a really long night, she gave it some time and tried again. Nothing. She tried 5 or 6 times and was getting worried that Christine still had not answered. Around 12:30 or 1, the time is a guess from both Jen and Kelly, and in their interviews with detectives and during the trial later on, they both said different times. One even said 10 a.m. Jen called Kelly and said she'd been trying to reach Christine all morning and she was getting worried she couldn't reach her. Kelly guessed that Christine was still sleeping. After all, she didn't get home usually before 3 a.m. when she closed the night before. Kelly did look out her window and spotted Christine's silver Toyota Celica in the parking lot and reassured Jen that Christine had made it home safely from work and was probably just sleeping in. Kelly was in the middle of writing an English paper and anxious to get back to it, and she told Jen, just try again in a little bit. I'm sure she's just sleeping. Then they hung up. Jen continued trying to reach Christine, and by 3:15, she was super stressing. After talking to Kelly the first time, Jen had reached out to Christine's mom and sister. Neither of them had heard from Christine. She called again and begged Kelly to please just go make sure Christine was all right. Kelly agreed. Still on the phone with Jen, she opened her apartment door to go check. Walking to Christine's and Jen's door, which had a huge Halloween banner decorating it, she noticed the door wasn't closed. It was open about an inch, maybe 3. Pushing the door open, Kelly called out to Christine and was met with silence, but before she could register that, she spotted Christine. Right inside the door, in the small foyer of the apartment, Christine was laying on her stomach in a pool of blood. Kelly gasped, I don't think she's okay. Continuing, she said, I think she hit her head. I'm going to have to call you back. Kelly hung up with Jen, and I just can't imagine being 100 miles away from such an important person in your life, and there's nothing you can do but wait.
Yeah, that would be so
And
hard.
that gasp and just that reaction from Kelly must have been terrifying for Jen. I can't even imagine that.
There's no FaceTime, and she doesn't have her cell phone. So her option is to wait by the landline to try to call back.
That's so hard.
Even like to start driving back, you wouldn't even be able to sit and wait for her to call because
And
you don't have your
she's,
cell phone.
what, you said 100 miles away?
Mm-hmm. So it took just under 2 hours to make that drive. Kelly immediately called 911 at 3:17 p.m. As she did this, she went to find Clint to come back with her, telling him Christine was hurt. They go to the apartment, and Kelly's on the phone with the 911 operator. She told her that her friend was hurt, bleeding, and unconscious. With that information, the 911 operator asked Kelly to roll Christine over and try to administer CPR. As Kelly touched Christine for the first time, she was shocked at how cold she felt and how rigid. Kelly told the operator that she wasn't able to turn Christine over. As Kelly was on the phone and trying to do this, Clint saw a shell casing on the floor about 6 inches away from the front door. He realized that Christine didn't fall and that they shouldn't be in there anymore. Later in court, Kelly will testify that she saw the casing, it just didn't register with her for the first time. She couldn't make her brain process that that was the scene that she had just walked into and that she was seeing.
I mean, I would be freaking out.
Especially if it's your really good friend. And
I mean, I don't think I'd be paying much attention to the surroundings at all, you know?
No, especially with the amount of blood that's there.
Yeah.
Also, Kelly will say that they never slept in that apartment again. Clint helped Kelly up and took the phone from her, telling her and the 911 operator that they needed to get out there right now. He implored the 911 operator to please send someone quickly. She wasn't just hurt, it's so much worse. Because the 911 operator had actually already sent medical help, the Orlando Fire Department arrived first. They did attempt life-saving measures, but it was unfortunately too late. Orlando police got the call at 3:19 p.m. and dispatched officers Lewis, McClellan, English, and Gonzalez to the apartment complex. They were told that it was a sick or injured person, but before they arrived, the fire department reached out to advise them that she was actually deceased. Officer Gonzalez was the first on the scene. The firefighters met him and let him know what the scene looked like, including the shell casing. Officer Gonzalez quickly roped off the scene with crime scene tape. Officer Elizabeth English was second on the scene, and together she and Officer Gonzalez entered the apartment to check and make sure that no one else was still in there. They confirmed the apartment was empty and they were ready to process the scene. So remember, at 3:15, Kelly had let Jen know that Christine was hurt and that she was going to call 911. Left with that, Jen jumped into action. She borrowed her brother's cell phone, called her mom, then Christine's mom, Tina, and Christine's sister, Barbara. While making these calls, she started her 100-mile drive to Orlando. And again, I can only imagine how stressful that drive was.
That's a long time to just sit there and be alone with your thoughts.
does she even know what happened?
No.
Just know she's hurt, right?
Kelly just told her that Christine was hurt.
Yeah, and that she was calling 911.
That she maybe hit her head. Jen made it to Clint and Kelly's apartment at 5:15 p.m. When she arrived, it was total chaos at the apartment complex. She discovered crime scene tape blocking her apartment. She was then given the devastating news that Christine was deceased and also that it was a murder. Thankfully, Jen's mom, Sandy, had been able to meet Jen there and support her as she got this heartbreaking news. She testified in court that she was on her drive back from her North Carolina trip and basically turned the car and went the direction that Jen was headed. Detective Campbell had arrived to help with the investigation, and he was able to get formal statements right away from Clint, Kelly, Jen, and also Jen's mom. So let's talk about the crime scene a little bit. Really rough. I can't imagine being Kelly having walked into that. There was a full team ready to process this scene and investigate the crime by early evening. The Orlando Police Department assigned Detective Roy Filippucci first to the case. He was very experienced as a detective, and also he had been a sex crimes detective as well. The Deputy Chief Medical Examiner arrived at 6:15. His name is Dr. William Anderson. By 6:30, we had 2 crime scene technicians able to process the scene and also a medical examiner tech who worked on this case.
Is that timeline pretty standard? Because that seems pretty spaced out, like where the cops got there, 3:30-ish, and then processing till like 6:30. You find that that's pretty standard, or that seems like an extended period of time for me?
That seems pretty standard for the medical examiner and for the detectives that would investigate the case. The police officer is usually there immediately, but for some of these more specialized departments, especially on a Saturday, they're not working or on the clock right then.
Oh, okay, that makes
So
sense.
they come in.
Probably were on call and had to come in maybe from home or from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Also have to rub off the scene and like clear people, and normally they start taking statements at that time, I think.
Yes, which the police officers that were on the scene right away had interviewed Clint, Ellie, Jen, and Jen's mom. So, the crime scene, as I mentioned previously, Christine was found about 6 feet inside the apartment. Her legs were pointing towards the front door, which is still in the foyer of her apartment, while her torso was in the entrance to the kitchen. She was lying face down with her right arm sort of tucked under her body. There was a massive pool of blood under her upper half mostly. Her dark hair was in her hair clip she always wore to work and was matted with blood. There were trails of blood from her mouth and her nose that ran towards the back of her head. To think about that, she's laying face down, but the trail of blood is going the opposite direction. There was a bag from a restaurant called Checkers next to her face, which appeared to also have blood on it. Her clothing had been altered, with her shirt and her bra pushed up, and her pants and underwear had been pulled down. The crime scene technicians found signs that this had all happened during the attack. They noted that her pants had been pulled down when she was already on the ground, and also her bra and shirt pushed up. They noted right away areas of dried bodily fluids on her body, as well as foreign material in at least 3 separate places. DNA swabs were able to be taken right then and there without waiting for her autopsy to do that. Dr. Anderson noted that Christine was in full rigor mortis when he arrived at 6:15. This indicates that she had been deceased for at least 6 hours. It could have been longer than this, but that was the minimum. They were able to determine fairly quickly this was a homicide, and the Criminal Investigations Division, that's part of the Orlando Police Department, was called in. They brought in 3 detectives, including the one that we had mentioned, Roy Filippucci, and he's going to be the lead on this case for the first several years. They all worked the scene. They had the crime scene tech work it. Kelly was able to tell investigators right then. When she first went over, the door was open a little bit. They still checked for signs of forced entry, checking because whoever did this could have just left through the front door, but they wanted to find out how he got in.
They didn't come in a window or...
Exactly, because they also had a sliding glass door and then all of the windows. They found that everything was still locked. There were no signs of tampering or entry, and this was also the case for all the windows in the apartment.
So do they think that they followed her into the apartment?
Yes, I'm sure they're looking for certain extra signs because somebody could lock a window or a sliding door behind them.
Right, yeah.
They didn't find any evidence that he hadn't just come through the front door.
No windows broken or like...
Yes, exactly. Detectives also found that Christine's car was parked and locked, indicating that she had made it home from work. Her car was eventually impounded. They found no prints that they could process. They observed on the front passenger seat a sweatshirt, and on the floor by the front passenger seat 2 open books of CDs. This isn't conclusive evidence that she had come home alone, but it did point to that, because no one could have been sitting in the front seat with the things the way that they were.
Yeah, that makes
Also,
sense.
too, it's good to know, like, probably weren't in the back seat. Like, if she got home and locked her car and walked up to her room, like, if they were in the car, she probably wouldn't have locked it.
Right. They were mostly wondering if somebody that she worked with had come home with her. Yeah, and then that would give them avenues to investigate.
Look into.
Yes. Investigators talked to Jen quite a bit and learned a lot more about Christine's habits to help narrow down what had happened. She shared that when Christine got home from work, she would take her shoes off and put them on their shoe rack right by the front door. which actually Jen was into woodworking and had made the shoe rack. She also would take out her hair clips she always wore to work. When she was found, she was still wearing both her shoes and her hair clip. They're realizing this was right after she got home from
It
work.
was like walking in the door, probably.
Yes. She also, when she got home from work, changed her clothes really quickly. She didn't like how they smelled after being at work, working in a bar, fast food, alcohol. And that day she had worked a double. Jen said she would have changed the second she walked in.
I always used to do that when you're just covered in stuff and you just want to get out.
Yeah, working in the kitchen, just all my clothes smelled like grease.
That's how Christine felt too, and just could not wait to get them off.
Yeah.
Just even from one shift, and on this day she had done 2.
Her shoes. I know, just from working, second you get home, you want to kick those shoes off. And she's been working a double shift.
Yeah, her first shift was over at 5:30, and we're talking almost 4 a.m. They found Christine's purse on a dining room chair, which wasn't far from the front door. Her keys were on the table next to it. Her red purse looked like it had been rifled through because receipts and papers were around it on the floor, including the receipts that we talked about from that day. The tickets that she had purchased for the Halloween party were also on the floor. There was no cash found, and we know her tips were paid out in cash. But her cards were left untouched in her wallet, and her wallet was on the floor. They also found Christine's backpack that she took to work with her personal items scattered all over the ground, including her phone, lipstick, loose change, her checkbook, and then also school things like highlighters, pens, things like
Do you have a
that.
computer in her backpack or anything like that?
That's a good question. I didn't hear or read that there was or wasn't. They do note the only thing missing was the cash.
This was 2001 as well.
Detectives determined that at least some struggle had taken place. The trash can lid was broken and garbage was all around the front room. They did find red stains on the wall near the front door, but no other blood was found anywhere else except underneath Christine. This leads them to believe that the whole struggle and everything that happened was right when she came in the front door.
They find like any DNA underneath like her fingernails or anything to indicate like a struggle or
No, isn't that crazy?
is crazy.
The shell casing that was on the floor was tested along with the bullet, and they were the same, a Winchester 25. The gun used would have to be a 25 automatic caliber. There were no prints found on the casing. They put the information into NIBIN. It's really stunning to consider that if this was just a robbery, it was only for $500. Christine's body was moved that night to the District 9 medical office for her official autopsy. The autopsy was conducted the next day by Dr. Anderson, who had observed the crime scene and collected DNA the night before. Detective Filippucci observed the autopsy. All of her clothing was collected into evidence. They checked her body for prints, but found none. However, while checking for prints and noting her tattoos, they found more areas to swab for potential DNA, 7 in total. DNA was sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's DNA lab. The autopsy revealed that those swabs were deemed to be semen. It was only found on Christine's back and lower legs, and there was no evidence of any further sexual assault. Detective Filippucci, the killer, upon seeing Christine fall, might have made an impulse decision to end it the way that he did. Whether it was intentional or not, it's impossible to know. On March 21st, 2002, exactly 5 months after this tragedy, it was reported that the swabs gave a full DNA profile, and it also showed that there was only one DNA profile from every single swab. This was good news. They had DNA to work with. They put it into CODIS. There were no hits.
You said
Yes.
5 months is so long to wait.
Too long. In 2001, after September 11th happened, there was just abundance of DNA that needed a profile made on it. And it took some of the departments that were around New York City years to catch up on. The sheer amount that they needed to go through for murder cases that happened in that area And there were some cities outside of New York City that they sent their samples to that backed up. And I'm actually curious now if this was one of them. I'm going to have to look that up. And they got so many of the samples to help the New York City labs with. It could be that. CODIS stands for Combined DNA Index System. This is a program through the FBI supporting criminal justice DNA databases and also the software used to run these databases. CODIS was designed to run one DNA profile through and try to match from one to any department across the country. Before this was set up, you would have a crime committed in one city, and they might leave DNA at that scene, and one city over commit another crime, and they didn't have a way of connecting.
Wow.
So this makes it so it's all centralized. When a crime like this is committed, if they find who it is right away, they get that DNA profile, they put it in the database, and other cities that maybe have the DNA but don't know who did it can run it through again and see if it matches.
That'd be so helpful.
Absolutely. The autopsy showed that Christine died from a gunshot wound to her face. The bullet went right between her upper lip and her nose, and it stayed lodged in her brain. They removed it during the autopsy. The bullet was really small. It didn't do extensive damage to her face. When Kelly and Clint found her, they didn't notice that there was a gunshot wound on her face.
Wow.
And I don't know, when you're laying on your side, if it was the side that was kind of down towards the ground, perhaps. It wasn't very visible.
When you have that much piercing too.
Yes. There's something called stippling, which indicates that a victim is shot at close range. This is something they use to determine maybe a suicide if someone's holding the gun close to them, if they've completed suicide. Stippling shows up when the gun is about a foot, maybe 18 inches away or closer. This was not present on Christine, so it tells us that she was shot from a further range. Following the path of the bullet, detectives were able to see an upward trajectory. She could have been standing with the suspect down on the ground, or more likely, she was already laying down and the suspect was coming at her from her feet.
Are there any signs like that she had been hit or anything?
Yes, you are asking the question for my next information.
Your mind reader, Lara.
Exactly. The autopsy didn't show defensive wounds on Christine's body, indicating that she was most likely shot quickly and with little warning. The bullet severed nerves that would have caused Christine to become paralyzed right away, also preventing her from fighting back or defending herself. There were 3 small areas of bruising on her face and a small cut on the back of her head. The detective was able to conclude that Christine had been struck at least twice with a hard object, like the butt of a gun, but not a fist.
I think like he hit her with the gun.
Yep.
Sounds like he her in the door.
That's what it sounds like. I kind of think that he might have come in right after her and she turned, noticing like her door open or someone coming in behind her, and he hit her in the face and she fell backwards because she would have been on her back when she was shot and maybe hit her one more time.
I feel like he would hit and then like if she go down, hit again. I don't know. Especially if he's down and then he shot her. I don't know that he would hit again, especially if he shot her in the face.
That's possible too. It's hard to hit someone like that with that much force when they're on the ground. That's a great point. Detectives were able to prove, like we just said, that she was laying on her back after she was shot because of those blood trails. The autopsy was also able to show that she was turned over fairly quickly after she was shot. They weren't able to give a time of death from the autopsy, but they guessed between 6 to 12 hours from the time she was found, which was the 3:29 time. The autopsy and crime scene investigation didn't prove to offer many leads. Universal Security reviewed the security footage to find a timeline for Christine for the detectives. As they reviewed it, they noticed something interesting. There was a white sedan driving around the employee parking lot. They were not able to identify this vehicle, unfortunately. They were able to see the vehicle at 3:47 a.m., which is very close to when they saw Christine walking into the parking lot at 3:51. This suggested to detectives that perhaps this car saw Christine or was waiting for Christine and followed her home. Detectives came back to the apartment complex one night around 3:30 a.m. to see what it looked like. They were struck by the fact that it was really easy to see Christine's door fully from the parking lot at that time. This gave the investigation two theories that they started to work off of. One was that she was killed by someone she knew. The other was that someone followed her home planning to rob her. Perhaps something had gone wrong with the robbery, prompting this person to shoot her. Maybe they panicked. Maybe it was both. Was it someone she didn't know that was obsessed with her? They knew all leads needed to be fully looked into because so far there was nothing pointing to any one person. And again, these first few months where they start doing this investigation, they don't even know if they have a full DNA profile. We mentioned it took 5 months to get that back. Life for Jen, Clint, and Kelly was forever altered, as you can imagine. Clint and Kelly moved, and after that day, they never slept in the next door apartment again. Christine's sister, Barbara, who also attended UCF, set up a fundraiser in Christine's name. They raised around $10,000. This gives $500 to one deserving student each year in her name.
So great of them to set that up.
I love honoring her memory
Yeah.
that way. There were many theories in this case. One thing was nagging at them. They just didn't know how this person got into the apartment. Whether she knew him and let him in, or was he already inside? Was he waiting in that dark hallway, hoping she didn't lock the door and he could just go in after her? Somehow he was able to get in right behind her. The endless possibilities made it really tough to narrow down where to start, especially when we have no other evidence. Getting the DNA into CODIS was really helpful, but there were no hits and no matches. That didn't provide any leads that they could narrow down or decide which avenue to follow next. The general theory, based on all the evidence they were able to get, was that she was killed right when she got home, around 4:20 a.m. Detectives tried to see if any of the neighbors heard anything. The fact of the matter was that there was a gunshot in the apartment, and if someone heard that, it could help them narrow down the timeline. There was one neighbor who was just a few apartments over who told detectives around 4:30 that morning she heard what she thought was glass breaking, but it was really, really loud. However, the apartment didn't have any broken glass, so detectives were wondering if that was the gunshot that she heard or if it was something else.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if it was muffled, that could have sounded. Oh, she just heard a loud noise and wasn't sure what it was.
And when you're asleep and then you hear a loud noise and you wake up because of that loud noise, I think it's really hard to determine what exactly that was. None of the other neighbors had heard anything, even Clint and Kelly, who were right next door. The things they found scattered on the floor, like Christine's wallet, purse, checkbook, they were all processed for fingerprints. None were found.
Loves.
Yep.
So it sounds like it was premeditated.
Because you can't go through and pull out the cash from her purse without touching it.
Right.
The other option to that, however, is that did they force Christine to hand her cash over? I don't think so, because it seems like it was a blitz attack really quickly after she got home.
Well, and also if her items are scattered over the floor, but her purse is sitting on a chair, like it doesn't make sense that she would pull stuff out, like her credit card stuff like that. It seems like he had to have gone through her purse after the fact.
So he had to be wearing gloves. They tested everything for prints in the apartment. The walls, door handles, cupboards, door frames, bathroom fixtures, kitchen sink, the fish tank, appliances. They found a lot of prints that they tested. Most belonged to Jen and Christine or Clint and Kelly. Some were obscure, but they could have pointed to any one of the friends between the four of them. They didn't find anything in the apartment that was useful. However, there were many outside the apartment as well, and some of those were interesting to detectives. They checked on 5 prints they found on the railing leading up to the apartment, but they didn't get any hits on those either. Detectives had nothing else from the crime scene they could use, so they started trying to eliminate Christine's family and friends, her coworkers, or anyone else that they could find some kind of link to Christine. Because they had the DNA profile, the best method was just to collect DNA from these people and eliminate them one by one.
Yeah.
Investigators didn't disclose where the DNA had come from until the trial, way down the line.
Her friends and family didn't know
That's what it sounds like, that they were keeping that pretty close so that it wouldn't give anybody a heads up on how to answer the questions that detectives were asking.
Only the murderer would know that.
Right. So they went about collecting DNA and they kind of let people think that the DNA they had on file came from a cigarette butt outside the apartment. We know often it's the ones closest to the victim that are responsible. When this isn't the case, it must be absolutely devastating to feel accused or put through the ringer when you have just lost a loved one. So I'm going to preface this part by saying Jen was in no way, shape, or form responsible or contributed to what happened to Christine. However, they still had to look at her and make sure they could rule her out. In this particular crime, we have DNA present that we know couldn't have come from Jen. So they know that if she was involved, she couldn't be solely responsible. They still investigated it at the beginning as if she had played a role. And again, to be clear, she did not. In talking to Christine's friends and family, they did admit that Jen could be jealous sometimes, especially when men made passes at Christine. Also, just over 3 weeks before the murder, on September 28th, 2001, Jen had been arrested in downtown Orlando in an incident where the police report stated she had battered the victim. It was apparently a bar fight that had gotten out of hand. She had been at a going away party and there was some sort of disagreement. She was asked to leave by the bouncer, but for whatever reason came back. They were fighting and she punched someone. In reading the police report from the prior incident, detectives learned that Jen had a gun permit and in fact could be linked to 2 guns that were 25mm handguns recently purchased by her stepfather. Also, in searching the apartment, detectives found a hammer by the bed. As far as I could tell, it didn't appear to be used in the assault, but they did note it in their report nonetheless. It turns out Jen loved woodworking and was always found working on a project. Like how we mentioned, she made their shoe rack. That was right when they came in the house.
Anyone know, is a 25mm pretty good or bullet size?
It's really small.
It's smaller than what normally people would have.
Mm-hmm.
You have guns in the apartment?
No, they weren't hers. They were her stepfather's. So they were just saying she technically had access because that was the house that she was at that night. But she said she got her gun permit and really never used it. And actually, when she was in that fight, because of how they ended up charging her from September 28th, she lost the ability to even have a gun permit. She never tried to get one again. Police also looked at Jen calling several times for Christine in the day she was found. Was she worried? The answer is yes. Or was she trying to establish an alibi for herself? She was interviewed extensively. She denied being jealous. She always maintained that she could never hurt Christine. Her mom and brother confirmed that she was in Vero Beach on the night Christine was murdered. While it was technically possible to drive to Orlando and back quickly, it just didn't add up. Detective Filippucci testified later that he never really considered Jen a suspect, but it was important to fully look into all of the leads that they had. Investigators asked Jen in her very first interview, right after Christine had been found, if she could think of anyone who would want to hurt Christine. She told them about a, quote, weird guy who she was worried had been stalking Christine. He would go into cigars often and try to chat up Christine. He always wanted to talk to her about his relationships with other women and flirt with her. Jen said that Christine had told him she wasn't interested. She turned him down several times, but he persisted. She told him she was a lesbian, she had a girlfriend, she was in a committed relationship. This didn't deter him, and he continued coming into cigars and harassing Christine while acting like he was flirting. He had told Jen multiple times that he kept coming in and never seemed to take no for an answer. Unfortunately, Jen didn't know his name, and the only description she had was that he was a black male in his 30s with a thick build, and he was bald. Jen also mentioned she thought he worked at the NASCAR cafe at Universal City Walk. This all came up in the chaos of everything going on in the first day, and it ended up getting buried in the case files. Staying with Christine's inner circle, detectives also looked into Clint as a possible suspect. He was right next door and, in fact, even had a key to Jen and Christine's apartment. they couldn't find a real reason or motive for him to be involved, and it appeared to the detectives that he was genuinely upset with what had happened. He gave a DNA sample and was ruled out as a suspect. He was asked if he could think of anyone who would want to hurt Christine, and he said he really couldn't. The only person he could even come up with was Christine's last boyfriend. That relationship had ended more than 2 years ago, but it was the only name he could come up with. Everybody loved Christine. And that's where we'll leave it for right now. One thing is for certain, everyone loved Christine. When we pick up in the next episode, we'll start right where we left off with detectives going to interview Christine's last ex-boyfriend. Thank you so much for listening. We're so grateful for you. Please, if you haven't, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and all the other socials at Crime Clueless. Check out our website, crimeclueless.com. And remember, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard. Not today, murderers. See you next time. Bye.